My parents forced their 14-year-old child to pay rent, but I made them face the law. When I was 14, my parents handed me a contract, demanding I pay them rent, not because we were broke, but because they thought it'd build character. That was the moment I realized, if I didn't fight for myself, no one else would. And what came next? Well, let's just say they learned exactly what happens when you push a child too far. If you've ever been underestimated, or if someone ever made you feel small for wanting basic respect, this story is for you. Hit that like button, subscribe, and get ready, because what started as neglect turned into one of the most poetic justice stories you'll hear today. By the time I turned 12, I already knew what hunger felt like. Not the kind that fades when you grab a snack, but the kind that lingers in your stomach for days. While my friends complained about cafeteria pizza, I'd quietly skip lunch, pretending I wasn't hungry. The truth. My mother had told me I'd need to start buying my own food. She said it casually while flipping through a magazine. You're old enough to learn responsibility. Meanwhile, my father was in the living room, yelling at the TV, another sports package he'd just upgraded to, another takeout box tossed on the table. They were living comfortably. I was surviving. At 12. That was when I decided that if they wouldn't take care of me, I'd have to take care of myself. I started small, babysitting for neighbors, walking dogs after school. When that wasn't enough, I offered yard work, mowing lawns, trimming bushes, hauling leaves, anything that earned me a few dollars. Every time I came home sweaty and tired, I'd see my parents lounging in the living room, TV blaring, laughing about how independent I was becoming. "We raised her right," my dad would say, holding up his beer. "She's learning the value of money." I wanted to scream, "No, I'm learning the value of neglect." But I stayed quiet, because yelling never worked in our house. I used that silence as fuel. Each dollar I earned became another brick in the wall between me and them, my wall of freedom. When I turned 14, I thought maybe things would get easier. But instead, one night, my father called me into the kitchen. He was sitting at the table with a stack of papers. My mom was smiling, that tight, fake smile she always wore before saying something cruel. Dad slid a piece of paper across the table. "You're making money now," he said, "so it's time you contribute." At first, I thought he was joking. Then I saw it. A typed, printed contract. $350 a month, due on the 1st, for rent. I remember my throat going dry. My voice came out in a whisper. "You want me to pay rent?" My mom crossed her arms. "You need to learn what adulthood feels like. We're not raising a freeloader. That word burned into me. I was 14, paying for my own food, my own clothes, my own school supplies, and they still wanted more. I went to my room and cried silently that night. Not just because of the money, but because I realized they saw me as a paycheck, not a person. For days, I walked around in a fog. How could I say no? They were my parents. I was terrified of what would happen if I refused. Then, something small but powerful happened. At school, my counselor, Mrs. Carter, noticed I was quieter than usual. She asked if everything was okay, and for the first time in years, I told an adult the truth about the food, the rent, the lessons they claimed to be teaching me. Mrs. Carter's face changed from concern to something sharper, controlled anger. She didn't lecture me. She simply said, "You did the right thing telling me. We're going to help you." That sentence, those 5 words, were the first real comfort I'd felt in years. Within a week, Mrs. Carter connected me with legal aid. They treated me seriously, not like a child whining about chores, but like someone experiencing real neglect. They helped me gather proof. Screenshots of texts from my mom telling me to buy your own lunch, receipts from my yard work payments, photos of the pantry locks they'd installed after I once took a can of soup without asking. They built a file, a case. Then they drafted a letter to my parents. It stated in legal language that what they were doing could be considered child neglect and financial exploitation, that they were obligated by law to provide food, shelter, and basic needs. When the letter arrived, I could hear the shouting through my bedroom wall. Dad's voice thundered, "She went behind our backs." "She got lawyers involved," Mom hissed back. "We'll lose everything if this goes public." For once, I wasn't scared. For once, they were. A week later, my dad showed up where I worked, the local hardware store. He slammed the door open, red-faced, shouting that I'd betrayed him. Customers froze. My manager came running. Before I could speak, someone called the police. Child welfare was contacted. Within hours, a caseworker was at our house, inspecting everything. The empty fridge, the pantry locks, the rent contract still sitting on the kitchen table. That night, the balance of power shifted permanently. Under supervision, my parents were forced to remove all locks on food storage, provide meals and basic necessities, sign an agreement prohibiting rent or household fees until I turned 17. It was all monitored by the agency and legal aid. For the first time in years, I could breathe. The house didn't feel like home, but at least it wasn't a battlefield anymore. Mrs. Carter checked on me weekly. A kind neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, would slip extra groceries into my bag just in case. Slowly, I started feeling like a teenager again, one who had rights, boundaries, and a future. Months passed. Dad found a night shift job. Mom picked up a part-time work. The house was quieter, the shouting less frequent. They were still distant, polite, but hollow. They knew they couldn't push me anymore. I focused on school and my yard care business. Then one afternoon, I got a letter. I'd been accepted into a dual enrollment college program. It meant I'd graduate high school with college credits, one step closer to freedom. When I told my parents, they barely looked up. Dad muttered, "Good for you." Mom said, "Don't expect us to pay for it." I smiled. "Don't worry," I said. "I never did." And that was it. The moment I realized I didn't need their approval, not anymore. The real revenge wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, powerful, permanent. They wanted to teach me the value of money. Instead, I taught them the cost of neglect. Because the day that legal aid letter arrived, the day they realized their lesson could land them in court, they finally learned what real accountability looked like. They lost control, and I gained mine. And when I walked across that stage at graduation, earning not just my diploma, but my independence, I didn't look for them in the crowd. I didn't need to. My life, my future, was the only revenge I'd ever need. Sometimes revenge doesn't come with fireworks or shouting. Sometimes it's just living better, building the life they said you couldn't. And that's exactly what she did. Because the most powerful justice isn't punishment, it's peace. If this story hit you right in the heart, give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and tell me in the comments, what's your definition of justice? And of course, Subscribe for more true stories of karma, courage, and sweet, sweet revenge.